Hello once again, everyone. So, bit of a change of setting. I had some time at home, and so I'm knocking out this video because I've been very bad about recording and uploading things recently. Don't worry, I am going to get better at it. But this is specifically, I put up the dagger sparring footage, the long dagger sparring footage, and a couple people were asking me about what daggers we were specifically using, and so I thought I would break them out and go into detail about them, as well as why we have them, why we've started sparring with them, because you'll probably be seeing more of them on the channel, hopefully over the course of the next year. So, firstly, let's go ahead and go over mine. Let's start at the very beginning. Why? Just why? Why do I have this long dagger? And certainly a long dagger that isn't, like a parrying dagger or things along those lines. So, one of the big things that I am hopefully working toward in the next couple years, that I've already kind of worked toward, is Feldlager and other sorts of events like that, where it's more about being. It is kind of more like a mill sim, but there's more focus on, unlike EHAW, there's more focus on what equipment specifically you're carrying has to be within a certain period, within a certain culture, within certain standards. And so as I was putting my kit together for a local, well, semi-local, an American event adjacent to that, called the Muster, I needed a sidearm. And I was like, okay, what am I going to carry? I don't really want to walk around with a sword banging off of my hip because that's obnoxious. I'm not going for a command position, so I don't want to be, carrying something all that grandiose. And so what I settled on was I really wanted to carry something like a dirk or a skein. And so for comparison's sake, I actually have, and this is what I carried when I was first testing out my kit. This is the Scottish dirk from Todd's Workshop. So as you can see, it's relatively small in the hilt. Now I will say they are supposed to be this way. So this actually fits my hand very, very well. Long though in the blade, coming down to a little bit past my elbow, nice and comfortable, kind of everything I would want as far as a dirk goes. And the skein from Todd's Workshop is actually even longer and thinner in profile, but I liked how this just kind of stuck in my belt and I could forget about it. It was, longer dagger than what most people carry, kind of sort of branching into that almost sword territory, but the region was all wrong because we're mostly focusing on Switzerland, southern Germany, middle Germany, that kind of area. So what I settled on was going for this. This is a Basilard or a Dagen. You'll hear, depending upon the length, whether or not it's called a Dagen or not. But as for the shape itself, you've got this distinctive kind of eye-shaped handle. You'll see earlier period ones that have a much thinner grip, kind of looking more like a letter H as opposed to an I. This one is the one you tend to see a little bit later, as well as also more distinctly like Swiss, from my understanding. It's got a nice, comfortable grip, and you'll see a couple that are this sort of shape. You'll also see longer ones. You'll see later period ones. They were around for a good, looks like 150 to 100, almost 200 years as popularity. The shape itself probably goes earlier than that, but you also see ones that are pulled out of the Thames. There's a lovely example of that actually that has a nice brass back where they've taken off this corner. Whether or not it was intentionally removed or not, we don't know. But basically, these were carried most commonly by the Swiss pikemen, Swiss mercenaries, southern German mercenaries, things like that. And apparently the English liked them as well. It's a great shape for a dagger handle, and it was everything I kind of wanted because it's long, it's very ergonomic, but most importantly for me, it's flat. That's really what I was looking for as far as the properties of it go. And the reason for that is that, in things like this, these kinds of events, there's more occasion for me to do more things that I don't normally do at other sorts of fighting events, like, for example, going prone. And so I wanted something that I could wear on the front of my person and not have it dig into me if I had to hit the ground. And I did, in fact, do quite a few tests where I laid on this in different configurations to figure out where it was most comfortable for me to wear it, versus comparing it to something like a rondel, which you could absolutely carry. Then this is not a perfect example of a rondel. This is a relatively cheapo one, but it's been stood by me for a while. This is fine, but it's chunkier handle almost always, especially to fit my giant Bigfoot hands. And it's just got a lot more going on. It's kind of built up. Even something like my Bollock dagger or my dirk, it's just a lot sitting in front of me. And not, of course, that I can't get over it and lay on it, but something like this where it's just flat and done was much more what I was interested in. The other thing is, with its particular shape, it lends itself well to both grips. And you do see both grips. There's several woodcuts showing the Swiss pikemen carrying them both, like a sword basically, and they would get longer than this, or instead holding it reversed like a dagger. Either way, they tend to vary in length from shorter than this. This one's about 18 inches or so, which, just for comparison to my forearm, you saw the dirk a moment ago, is a little bit longer, and I like that quite a bit. It feels good both ways that I could use it, both as a cutting instrument and also as a general stabbing or shielding instrument. And so this is what I went for. You mostly see them worn just straight down the front of the body, attached to the belt, and it really does serve kind of everything I wanted to do with it. I've gone up against Messers, I've gone up against Dussacs and a couple backswords and things like that. I would not take it up against a longsword, more for preserving the blade than anything else. I mean, going up against a longsword with just a dagger is already scary enough, but as far as being a medium long length sidearm, this is what I wanted, and this came out very, very well. How we built it, my father built this for me pretty much at my direction. We bought the blade from Castile Armory. It is the long dagger blade, I believe D4 Flex, which is their stiffest, and I definitely think that was a good idea because it just gives it more good feeling in the actions that I'm doing, and two, it of course won't take a set or things along those lines as I use it over the years. But also, the length is really what I was looking for. A lot of the dagger blades were more shorter. If they were longer, they kind of started to get whippy. So this is the best of both worlds. I really recommend this blade if you're trying to build something like this. The handle, meanwhile, is purple heartwood that my father carved into this shape. It's just one piece, I believe. And then he made these steel plates on either side. It does have a nut because it's a threaded blade, but it all comes together super well. It's super solid. It feels both good in ice pick grip and sword grip. It kind of does everything I want to do. The sheath, meanwhile, just a simple, slide it in, kind of forget about it sheath. I mostly wear it either suspended straight down or tucked into a sash at an angle, though I also went ahead and knotted it, so that way, if I need to, and I usually slept like this, I could just hang it around my neck. It does, of course, bounce around because it's big, but it works pretty well that way in case I need to do something else or don't have a belt on. But that's what I carried. That's why I continue to carry. I'm a big fan of this dagger. I love its shape. I love how it operates. But just for comparison's sake, and he was polite enough to let me borrow it for this, here is the dagger that Joseph carried. I've just got the ties braided up. This one is constructed a little bit differently. So this was, I believe, a Civetan parrying dagger originally, and we kept the pommel, we kept the grip, we kept the blade, and his blade is stiffer than mine, I would say, just a little bit. It's also a tiny bit longer, but in place of trying to change all the sort of hilt, we just gave him a simple disc, which turned out quite well. We've been saying that it kind of feels like a beefy, shorter little small sword, which is actually quite nice for a dagger like this, as he mostly favored fighting like this. And compared to mine, it takes that hand target. Not that we were going for hands, but it really does take that hand target pretty much entirely off the table. It's even a good armor dagger for that reason. So it's kind of the best of those two worlds. And he's been a big fan of this, and I'm not surprised why. But just for comparison's sake, those are kind of its main features. There were even a couple times when we were fighting against each other, that disc specifically led to interesting bind and hook points, and I had the same thing with my little outcropping. It doesn't seem like much because it's not like a crossguard like you're used to, but when the blades are so small and you're both fighting relatively narrow, that does make a big difference. Now then, just for extra comparison's sake, I also have the dagger that my father made for the muster activities. He made this for himself. This one's a little bit different. I don't remember which blade exactly it is. It's more flexible than both Joseph and I's. I believe he may have even ground this off from something that was bigger and broke. I don't remember. But point being, it's a little bit flexier, it's a little bit shorter, and then he went for just a simple sort of cruciform hilt, which actually came out very, very nice. He used more of that purple heartwood. This, again, flat profile. It's a little bit more of a sticker as opposed to a cutter, but it's just a bit more dagger-like. However, it's plenty still comfortable. He mostly wore this tucked into his purse like you would with a Bollock dagger or other sorts of things like that. And I honestly even forgot it was on his belt several times because it just sat there so well. But these sorts of long daggers are what I'm really encouraging most of my guys that are interested in muster related events and kind of the little group I'm building and carrying as you see things like this carried more prominently than swords or what have you. Now, of course, the swords, etc., wouldn't be carried, but short of everyone just sporting messers or smaller swords, like these are sort of more convenient, as well as we're not trying to get into close combat. You're usually doing something more akin to, I'm a crossbowman, I'm a pikeman, I'm doing some sort of other task. I have to have this weapon on me kind of at all times. And anyone who's worn a sword for long periods of time can account how annoying it is. A test, not account. But anyway, it gets in your way versus these sorts of things are easy to throw on, kind of forget about. And if you do have to draw steel, well, I mean, it's bigger than most other people's daggers, which is really the big benefit. So as far as from the video itself where Joseph and I were sparring, we did notice some interesting things. So when it comes to fighting with longer daggers, there are a couple sources that you can draw from, and I've done a little bit of reading around there. So for example, George Silver, don't click off the video, we're not going to get too deep into it, but George Silver does talk about fighting with alehouse daggers, which are basically same sort of idea, a long dagger or a short sword that's very cutting focused, and his advice is just cut whatever's closest to you, which pretty sound advice. Versus things like Marozzo and other sorts of more late Renaissance Italian sources or even Iberian sources do discuss using longer cut-focused daggers. And that, again, is kind of the same idea of just defend whatever's close. A lot of hand slips, a lot of simple cuts like that. Or if you are going to come in with a thrust, you are securing and extending, which, again, if you watch my video on advice of fighting with hand axes, the idea of make yourself safe, then go, or if it's a free shot, take it and get out of there, all of that is still very, very true. Joseph and I both noticed that for the most part we fought relatively narrowly, and I did describe it in the video description, but we're trying not to hit the hands so we can wear lighter gloves. So mostly it's cuts at the arm, quick cuts at the head, things like that. Other targets not really worth cutting at for the most part unless you can really saw your way in there. It's mostly then thrust to this center portion. We did both notice that, of course, the extension was relatively simple, mostly stuck right foot forward, extended quick, slipped. The parries actually worked a lot better than I expected on both our parts. We'd throw a cut or throw a thrust, and it was pretty easy to direct things off to the side, even though you're working with a much smaller tool. The fort and all of that still feels pretty much exactly the same. The biggest thing that we noticed that was rather odd was when you bring this up, you just prepare it above your head in, for lack of a better word, St. George or watch. It's a little more intimidating, and I don't quite know why. Just to walk through that process briefly, when someone holds a sword above their head, it of course is implying, I'm going to bring this down with force, and you understand that pretty well, and it can cause, like, oh no, that's up there at a bad time, I'm going to get out of here. But there's also an implicit amount of, like, it's going to take time to get to me, and that's not a terribly big deal. I can deal with that, or I can, make the mental math of this is going to take so long to reach me, no big deal. These, though, because of their speed and their quickness, it almost kind of reminds me of like a baton. I don't want to get hit by that. I know it's going to come down quick, and I know I can deal with it, but it's just, I don't want to get hit by that. It's going to go other places really quickly, and it's going to lead to more versatile things. So going up into these little high guards briefly kind of not only came well off of slipping my hand back, but also caused both of us to kind of back off a little bit. And we did at one point even have an exchange of basically cutting 7 cuts at each other and doing quick little covers. So there's something to be said there. I would still prioritize the thrust, and as I do more work involved with these sorts of things, I'm going to talk about that in regards to, okay, am I carrying something in my offhand? Am I securing something or what have you? And so if people are interested, I may even go into more detail about the specific pieces that have been coming about of our sparring. So we're going to be doing a lot more sparring, and as I build my group focused around Feldlager stuff, muster stuff, this sort of new avenue of interest, what comes out of that, and what kind of techniques, both for full gear safe sparring and then also for lower gear play sparring, come about and work from there. But otherwise, that's just a brief overview of all these long daggers. You'll probably be seeing them a lot more on the channel. Just hold on to that for me, Mr. Sauls. You'll probably be seeing that a lot more on the channel as I talk about it, because it's been kind of what's been interesting me in the next while, as well as I'll be talking about more yeehaw content and what have you. And certainly, speaking of which, if you are thinking about, hey, what should I carry at Yeehaw. Certainly you're not allowed to have steel, of course, but carrying something of about that length, around 18 inches to maybe 20 inches, as far as like a dagger or what have you, or a shorter sword, it's not a bad idea. It's easy to attach to you. It doesn't tend to get caught on things, and it's just long enough to be useful, but just short enough to be versatile. So I do kind of recommend that length if you're looking for something as far as a armored or partially armored dagger for war. But otherwise, hopefully this was interesting. Thank you all very, very much for watching. I'll be better about uploading some new content soon. I've got a couple projects in the works that I hope people will like, but more of that to come. So otherwise, thank you very much for watching. We'll go over some other equipment and techniques another time.